Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Sword Art Online video review. This one is going to be my first, review focus on one of the original source material things, that being the light novels. So this is going to be the review for the first part of Sword Art Online Progressive Volume 1. Now, the reason I'm doing Progressive Volume 1 in multiple parts, two parts, is because this book is about pretty much twice the length of any of the other parts. So it also covers 2 floors of Aincrad, whereas the other ones only cover 1 floor. So I want to basically have a video to cover each floor. So yeah, first of all, what is Sword Art Online Progressive? Most people are aware that the original source material for Sword Art Online is not a manga, it is actually a light novel. As you can see by the fact that this is written by Reiki Kawahara, and obviously illustrations by Abek, who obviously is a person who is the main design person for Sword Art Online. Now, progressive, it's kind of hard to describe what exactly it is. Some people say like it's a retelling of the original Sword Art Online story. Some people say it's just kind of covering the stuff that the other light novels didn't cover. And for me, it's a kind of weird one, because like people go back and forth about whether this is meant to be a kind of separate continuity to the other light novels, in terms of like it's actively going to tell a different version of Aincrad, in that the stuff that we know happens, that like the game ends on like floor 75 or whatever, is maybe not going to happen in progressive. But for me, I just see this as adding to what we already have. That this in many ways specifically avoids stuff that has already been written about in the other light novels. So it avoids basically telling you the whole origin story of the Game of Death. They specifically don't cover the whole Kayaba announcing to them all that it's a Game of Death. Kirito's meeting with Klein and stuff like that. They specifically don't focus on that in this book. And because of that, and how it kind of avoids certain continuity moments, and how, yes, it ends up kind of retconning a few little bits and pieces, because of that, I that's just the way I see this. That this is just telling us the stuff that we didn't get. That he kind of is realizing that Aincrad was such an interesting aspect of the overall Sword Art Online universe, and that like the whole 100 floor thing. There's a story to tell because they spent so much time in there, and each floor of Aincrad is really interesting. So I'm gonna do the story about everything that happened in the game, to further enhance who these characters are, what they went through in the game, and develop it more. So that's a kind of lengthy explanation about what this is. Now, so obviously for anyone unaware, the way these kind of books work is that it's primarily a novel, so it's all text. Because it's a light novel, the main difference would be that it's just very easy to read. It's kind of fast paced. It doesn't try to be like overly descriptive. It's very easy to read. There's not an incredible amount of words on each page, so that's probably the best way to describe a light novel. It's not trying to be like super heavy and hard going. It's just meant to be a kind of fun read, and that's exactly what it is. It also does have a few kind of art pages, kind of basically kind of manga pages, just without text throughout. There's not that many. There's maybe 10, 15 in the 360 pages or so that this book is. But it's fine. It's just at certain important moments they just have a kind of text page to kind of show something important. Like there's the kind of beater scene from the end of the first floor boss battle, and stuff like that. What else do we have here? There's Kabao speaking out at the kind of boss raid meeting. So you get the idea. And then at the start of the book, we have some of the coolest pages, in my opinion. You get kind of full color kind of intro kind of pages to the story, just establishing who they are. Like it says here for like Asuna, A player trapped inside Sword Art Online, without a care for her life, she throws herself into battle against monsters. Kirito, a swordsman aiming to beat the top floor of Aincrad, he adventures as a solo player, working only to strengthen himself. And then it gets into some of the more kind of floor-specific characters. It gives an intro on like the boss monster for the first floor, Dioval, Egil, Cabal, that sort of thing. And then the second floor boss monster, that sort of thing. And even a description, a kind of general description about what each of the floors that the book covers is really about. So like first floor, Aincrad's broadly conical in shape. So the lowest floor is the largest, the circular floor is about 6 miles across, and it's just going into a lot more depth. It's got the town of beginnings and who the boss is, that sort of thing. So it goes into kind of nice detail, just making it clear that we're going to give you information that the anime, that perhaps aspects of the original light novels didn't cover, because they were trying to tell a kind of more character-driven story. And that, like, if you read Aincrad 1, the kind of first light novel that came out, it literally is just, like, intro to what Sword Art Online is, the fact that they're trapped into the game. Skip ahead, key moment for Kirito. Skip ahead, how the game comes to an end. Mainly kind of focusing on Asuna and him coming together as a couple, ignoring most of, like, the detail aspects of what the game actually is and that sort of thing. So I really think that progressive is just, like it kind of says, it's just progressing, it's kind of following the Aincrad story as it progresses. So it does a good job at that. Now, there are 3 kind of sections in this book. This one's different than the rest. Volume 2 and 3, which are out in English right now, are basically just one book covering the floor. This one's split into 3 sections. The first one is called Aria on a Starless Night, which is basically floor 1 covering the boss. How Kirito and Asuna first met, which is different than you would have read in, say, the first light novel, or different from the anime. The second part is very short. Let me just find it here. Basically, the first part is that many pages. The second part is just called Interlude, The Reason for the Whiskers, and that's about Argo the rat and the reason why she has the whiskers on her face. It's just a nice little story. And then the second floor is basically, this is the length of kind of one of the normal novels. Like, it's this one is about, 140 to like 340, so it's about 200 pages per book usually. This one's longer because it had the intro stuff as well. But the floor 2 stuff is called Rondo for a Fragile Blade. And as I said at the start, I'm going to be just covering the first 2 sections of the book here, the Reason for the Whiskers and Aria on a Starless Night. So Aria on a Starless Night is basically episode 1 of the anime. So that comes directly from Progressive, but the book goes into a lot more detail. It kind of highlights stuff that the anime episode left out. Primarily scenes at the very start, like basically the first couple of pages of the book, where Kirito and Asuna first met. And then the other thing I think is most notable is that the character of Argo the rat, who I think you see for a few little moments in Sword Art Online, the anime, they don't really focus too much on her, is, I wouldn't say a main character, but she's kind of a recurring character in these Progressive books. She's the information broker character. She's also a beta tester, and I just think the way they utilize her and the fact that she's also a beta tester, and she ends up being a character that a lot of players kind of come into contact with just to get information on the game. They do some very effective stuff with her, hence why the interlude that focuses on her is really interesting. And then the other notable thing that's different is that they play up the kind of Diovel, Kabao, Kirito kind of relationship, kind of triangle thing differently here than they do in the show. Whereas I think the episode 1 of the show kind of made it out that Diovel and Kabao were completely different, and you do see that one scene in the anime where, like, immediately after the boss raid they're actually fine drinking together. and then Kirito is just kind of like the odd one out. Whereas here they kind of do this weird kind of thing where Diavel through Kibao is using Argo to try and buy Kirito's sword so they can stop Kirito from getting the last attack bonus on the boss, and so Diavel can be the one to do that. So they just kind of set up and establish Diavel's kind of want for the last attack bonus a lot more than they do in the anime episode. Obviously, you have the moment where like they get to the last little bit of health, and he's the one who starts his attack, but kind of makes the mistake. They just set it up a little bit more here that he tried to prepare for this a lot more and wanted to kind of get past the fact that he knew, also being a beta tester, that Kirito during the beta test had been getting most of the last attack bonuses himself, which is a kind of recurring joke throughout the first couple of light novels for Progressive, that Kirito has got the last attack bonus on like the boss every single time, and it really frustrates people. But getting into some of the specifics, how they first meet, Asuna and Kirito, this is probably the biggest, I suppose, retcon thing. And another thing I should actually mention about the books, kind of referring to this, is that there is an afterwards section at the end of every single one of these books, written by the author Reiki Kawahara. And basically, in a couple of them, he just talks about how he's... Let me see, can I find this? He says here, for a long time I've wavered between two options: avoiding that contradiction by starting off Progressive with a different heroine, or embracing the contradiction and going with Asuna right from the start. Ultimately, I admitted to myself that it didn't feel right having anyone but Asuna at Kirito's side, and I suspect that most of my readers feel the same way, so I decided to have Kirito meet Asuna right away. Of course, I'm sure that some readers will not be able to accept the contradictions with what I've written before, and that's okay, but I'll do my utmost to make sure that the choices I make line up with the established events as best I can. My hope is that you'll be able to overcome my inconsistency and enjoy this new series for what it is. To me, that is the most telling thing about what Progressive actually is. He's trying to make this fit in with everything else, but having to go into more depth on the other floors, he realizes that I kind of have to have Asuna and Kirito together a lot earlier on and for a lot more space of time. So it kind of contradicts, like, okay, they didn't actually meet for the first time at the first floor boss meeting. They actually met a little bit before that, which is why they joined together as a party so quickly. They actually, spent a lot more time together than perhaps the anime or the books kind of make out. That they didn't just meet up at some of the boss raid meetings and gradually kind of came closer together. No, they were actually partners together for the first couple of floors of Aincrad, and then something which we haven't experienced yet in Progressive happened, and they kind of split apart, which is where a lot of Kirito's solo stuff from early on in the anime happens. The whole Moonlit Black Cats incident, him meeting Silica, Lisbeth, and that sort of thing happens. So I think that's a very telling thing. So where they first meet is in the labyrinth to help try and find the first floor boss room. Specifically the 19th of 20 floors to find the boss. He comes across Asuna basically going kind of crazy, just attacking monsters wildly on the 19th floor. And she basically looks like she's about to pass out, so he kind of steps in and is kind of like saying like, well, you're going a bit overkill there, and you can see that he notices that like she has a really good grasp on her one basic fencing technique, which I will say one thing I really like about the light novels overall is that they name the attacks a lot more than the anime does. So they just established that the main rapier attack that Asuna uses is called linear. That's the main sword skill she uses, and they kind of established that obviously she's not as knowledgeable about MMOs as Kirito is, so she's overkilling the enemy. She's using a sword skill on them when they only have a tiny bit of health left, and he kind of teaches her this. And basically he's aware of how reckless that she's being in that she's clearly skilled. She has found some sort of a kind of skill with her rapier and can do a really good job, but she doesn't know some of these specifics and is being very reckless that like 1 millimeter off and she could be in a lot of trouble if one of the monsters counterattacks her. And so he just kind of teaches her some stuff, and she doesn't really want to accept it. And obviously, this is kind of referring back to Asuna's different perspective on things before she kind of gets more heavily influenced by Kirito. And she kind of collapses right there in the middle of the floor. And literally, she kind of goes unconscious. She just collapses right there and then. And she's kind of willing to accept that she's going to die. When I say this, it's that most of this book is from Kirito's perspective, but there are like a page or two here and there where you get it from Asuna's perspective, and after she collapses, you do get her waking up from her perspective, and that she's kind of expecting to kind of her next thought to be her kind of dead, wherever the next place is, that she's not expecting to wake up and actually be alive. And so when she does and finds out that she's next to Kirito and they're completely out of the labyrinth, they're not like in a safe zone, she's really shocked. So he saves her from the labyrinth, and they kind of make the joke about how like he can never tell her how he actually got her out of the labyrinth. And I think later on they do mention it, what it is, and it is pretty funny how he does it. I won't spoil that for anyone, because I don't think it might be in the second half, but it's been a while since I've read the second half, and I'll do that for the next review. But you kind of get that little joke, and then you just kind of get more of her perspective on things. You get the idea that he kind of calls her reckless. You could see that she has kind of at this stage she is kind of willing to die. That she kind of explains that her perspective on things is that she spent all her money on basically 5 of the same sword, the basic starting rapier. And she was spending the first 3 days since she started to actually like go into combat in the game. She spent 3 full days in the labyrinth, only sleeping in the safe zones, which completely shocks Kirito. The only food she's eating is the absolute cheapest stuff that she can get her hands on, because she doesn't want to spend money on stuff that's not important, because she only sees the virtual world as nothing's real. The only reason she buys food is because her virtual body says she has to eat, and she doesn't really care about the taste. And again, this is a really nice way to set up who she was before Kirito gives her a different perspective on things, teaching her that the virtual world can be quite real. So I think with Asuna especially, they do just a really good job at kind of characterizing her before Kirito, giving you much more depth on who she was at the start of the game, that like she kind of just stayed in the first town for a while and then made the decision to actually fight. And you get that obviously really nice important line of just how she doesn't want to just like rot away in the game, or what is it that she says? Yeah, so that I can be myself. If I was just going to hide back in the first city and waste away, I'd rather be myself until the very last moment. Even if it means dying at the hands of a monster, I don't want to let this game beat me. I won't let it happen. So that she just wants to be herself. She doesn't want to be this kind of almost cowardly person hiding back in the towns. That it's a really nice moment when that actually does happen. And yeah, so it's basically just establishing that before the scenes that we see in the anime episode, Kirito saved her in the first floor labyrinth and saved her from dying effectively. He then led her back to the town of Talbana, which is where the scene with him giving her the cream happens, and she has her first realization about how good food can be in the game, and stuff like that. So that's that. Yeah, then you have moments like the first floor boss battle and the meeting. The meeting goes basically the same way as the anime episode does. You know, Diavel leads, Kabao speaks up. The difference here is that they go into a little bit more depth in terms of what certain characters know. Because Kirito is narrating, he establishes that he had got information from Argo that of like X many beta testers in the game, basically 40% of them had died. So 40% of the beta testers are part of the like 2,000 or so people that died within the first week of the game or month of the game, as they kind of establish. And it just adds this extra layer to kind of what Kibao is saying, and that like you need to apologize to the like 1,800 people that died, and kind of Kirito under his breath is kind of saying to himself, but like 300 of those people who you're trying to like fight for are the people you're being mad at right now. And they just established that Argo is a beta tester, and the guidebook is basically given out by her. She's the one who compiled that, and the information that she sells money for, the information that she sells for money went into basically buying the stuff needed to make the guides that she gives out for free. So that's kind of what she's doing. She's people buy more specialized information from her, and she uses a lot of that profits that she makes to help the kind of rest of the players. So they established this, that she is this really good character, selfless, even though initially, you know, being called like the rat and being like an information broker, you'd expect her to be a very different type of character. And just the relationship that she has with Kirito is actually really, really interesting, in that they kind of both tease each other a lot, and that like you can tell that they're quite friendly with each other, but they can't be overly friendly because they're both beta testers and they don't want anyone else to know that. And she's aware of how knowledgeable Kirito is about the game, and that like there's only very specialized information that she can really sell to him, and it's just a kind of fun relationship that's going on between those two, and you kind of set up early on that there's a lot of mysteries that he would like to know about Argo, that like where do the Whiskers come from, why has she decided to take up this role in the game, like as a female character, why has she decided to put herself in this kind of dangerous position of like selling information and being this kind of intermediary between so many players. It's a really interesting dynamic that kind of comes up, and the as I said, the only difference in the kind of meeting is that they kind of have a break in the middle of the boss meeting, because Argo releases her information on the first floor boss, and they kind of read that, come back, and that's when the second half of the meeting takes place. And why this is so important is because when you get to the end of the boss battle, Diavel has been killed because of the mistake with the kind of boss's weapon, which is actually just a change from the beta test, which obviously Argo could never have kind of realized, and she specifically put in the manual that like this information comes from the beta test, the actual game may be different. But obviously when Kibao starts to blame everyone, the reason Kirito steps up and has his kind of big, I suppose, quote-unquote, evil kind of beater turn is not so much to help all of the beta testers. It's kind of, yes, is to help everyone else, is to keep, for the most part, the main group together. Separate himself out as being different than everyone else so it can basically help everyone. But it's primarily to save Argo, because he knows that if there's going to be anyone to really heavily blame, it's Argo, because they, from their perspective, her book was wrong, that got Diavel killed, she's going to be like headhunted by everyone, and that's going to create a huge problem because they're going to assume she is a beta tester, she gave the wrong information, she got everyone killed. Makes sense. And so Kirito's kind of big moment, making that sacrifice, as much as it's for everyone else, it is primarily for Argo, because he realizes that she's not really a fighter. She is going to be in a lot of danger, despite being one of the most helpful characters in the game, and it makes that kind of moment all the more meaningful. To the point where I really hope in the anime at some point they focus on Argo a bit and just establish who she is a bit more. So there's that, and then this leads into that interlude chapter that I was talking about, the reason for the Whiskers, in that Argo is completely aware of what Kirito did and how much it was to help her, and she basically says, alright, one piece of information, anything you want, for free. and he asks what the reason for her whiskers is, and that's the kind of lead into that interlude chapter. And it's very quick, it's like 20 pages. All it really is that she gets chased by some players because they know she has information about a specific extra skill that's available in the game. She doesn't want to tell them because it's kind of dangerous or something like that. Kirito kind of scares those two guys off, and he basically is kind of like, okay, I want to know the reason for your whiskers, but I think it somehow relates to this martial arts skill, and she just kind of is like, okay, you got me, it is. Here's what it is. She leads him to this kind of NPC in the game. He activates the quest to learn the extra skill, and what it is, it's the quest to get the extra skill martial arts. So this is like obviously hand-to-hand combat, punches, kick skills, effectively. And as part of this quest, the guy who teaches it to you in the game draws these kind of permanent whiskers on your face. So they basically reveal that Argo discovered this in the beta test of the game and kind of developed her personality in the beta test, and couldn't complete the quest to get rid of the whiskers. So she just kept that thing going into the full version of the game. Not really, like, not being a mistake this time. She just wants it to keep her character going. But Kirito, in activating the quest, gets the whiskers as well, and spends 3 days trying to break this immortal object rock in the game to learn the skill. And eventually he does it and gets the martial arts skill and the whiskers go away, but they kind of establish in the game that it's put him behind by like 30 hours or something like that because of how much time he spent breaking this rock just to get rid of the whiskers, so he doesn't look stupid around Asuna and stuff like that. So I thought that was a really fun chapter, and it just further established the friendship between Kirito and Argo, in that she appreciates so much what he did in basically becoming the bad guy to everyone else, to save her, and also when he saves her from the two guys. And you get the moment where she does hug him, and it's the one moment where she goes from being the really confident information broker to just kind of showing a little bit of her vulnerability, and just being aware of how powerful Kirito is. It's a very nice moment, definitely. In terms of the boss battle itself, there's not a lot of stuff to really add. They go into a little bit more depth in terms of the tactics of the boss fight, and that Diavel organizes them into groups, tanks. They explain certain terms like pot rotation, the switch skills explained a bit more. They explain the attacks of the bosses and the extra enemies and stuff like that. The attacks that the characters are doing, like Asuna and Kirito are doing, like Slant, Sonic Leap, Demon Nail, I think is the name of one of the attacks. It's really cool to just hear all these extra names for attacks that we've never heard before, and kind of put names to some of the attacks that Kirito actually does do in the show. But in general, the fight doesn't really go any differently, I suppose. It works the same way. Diavel gets killed by the katana attack. They do establish that the reason the thing was so different, that usually the boss would switch to just a really heavy weapon, which does a lot of damage, but it's easy to avoid, whereas in the full version of the game he switches to a katana. So if you get hit, it's not because it's a really heavy attack, but because it's a really fast attack, that if you get hit, get you put into a massive combo, basically, and that's ultimately what killed Diavel, the fact that he got trapped in a 7-hit combo or something like that. Only other thing to really talk about is that in between the boss battle and the boss battle information meeting and then the boss battle itself, Asuna is looking for a place to stay. Kind of being around Kirito a bit, she realizes that, okay, I as much as I don't want to spend a lot of money and do all this other stuff, I do want to have one good night's sleep, because she's expecting to basically die in the boss battle the following day. That's what you get out of her inner monologue kind of pieces throughout the book, and you have her basically go to stay with Kirito, who has found this place. Okay, Momo. Sorry. Sorry about that interruption. But yes, you get the moment where Kirito reveals that he's basically renting out the whole top floor of this kind of milk farm, and he kind of reveals that like it's a really nice place, like huge rooms and stuff like that. And Asuna kind of says, "Okay, I'll go spend the night here," and it plays on this idea of that like she's aware that Kirito's a nice guy and stuff like that, but she still has these kind of things about like, oh, I have to go stay with a boy in, the same house. That's like really awkward, and they're just these little teases that are just really nice, knowing where eventually the relationship goes. And there you just have this mix up where the big thing with Asuna is they kind of play this up a bit that this whole time she's kind of basically slumming it in the game. She's putting no attention really into the food she's eating, where she's sleeping. But the second Kirito mentions that where he's staying has a really nice bath, she's like, I need to go there. I'm willing to stay in this place with you because it has a bath. And so they get there, she immediately goes in to have a bath, and Kirito is obviously waiting outside. And at that point, like Argo comes to like tell him about something, basically the next part of the deal about Diovel trying to buy his sword off him. And there's this mix up when Argo goes to leave, she goes to like use the bathroom first, and again it's one of those moments where like the reason how Kirito managed to drag Asuna out of the first floor labyrinth when she was unconscious, they kind of said it just kind of comes up like the memory of this scene has been deleted from existence or something like that. That the result of like Asuna like naked in the bath, being interrupted by Argo, and then like the two of them falling out of the like bathroom together or something like that has just been deleted from his memory. Because Asuna obviously like they just established that like one of the kind of key things early on in their relationship is that like she's perfectly fine talking with him, but then every so often Kirito will just kind of say something because he's a little bit awkward that kind of causes Asuna to just kind of shoot him like a glare and be like, what did you just say? Like, what are you implying here? And this is kind of one of those moments where like it's just basically established that it's just this really awkward scene where we assume like he saw her naked or something like that, and she's just like, never speak of this again. And yeah, this is where you get some of the kind of fan servicey bits of the book, and that, of course, the artist has to kind of highlight that specific moment as one of the art pages, but it is what it is. But yeah, I do still think the anime episode is really good because ultimately it does focus on like the key aspects of what the book kind of covers. In that being the first floor boss battle, you do have some important moments of Kirito and Asuna, meeting and developing some form of a bond. You have Kirito's beater moment where he obviously makes saves the day in the boss battle, but is forced to kind of save the kind of future of the game by kind of exiling himself in a way from most of the big groups and stuff like that. It does add a lot of extra stuff with, I think, Argo being a really nice inclusion, not just as a character, but in terms of what she adds to some of the plot dynamics going on here. You get a few extra Kirito and Asuna scenes in addition to that, kind of retconning when they first met and how much time they spent together, but it's really good stuff. And then just, I think in general, the thing that the book has over the anime is just that those little extra game details of him establishing that he earned his sword, the Anil Blade, from one of the highest level quests on the first floor, and it was a big deal that he got it so quickly. And little moments like, oh, the reason where I got my cream from, that we use in that scene, that comes from this specific quest that you can do here, and here's some tips on doing that. Just little extra moments that completely add to the fact that this is a game. There are quests to do, whereas I think the anime kind of more focuses on the character stuff, and you still have like moments like them pulling up their screens, and it's very clear it's a game, the health bars, but not that many episodes focus on like the story of the game, them doing a specific quest, and the book constantly establishes in kind of background scenes that it is a game with moments like that. But yeah, that's been the review of the first half of this book. The videos in the future won't be this long. The reason this one's so long is because I really wanted to do an in-depth detail on what exactly the progressive series actually is. And especially with this one, there's a lot of like differences because it's sort of covered in the anime, but not fully in detail. In future, it'll all be just like my review of new stuff that we've never seen before, so it won't be as long. But yeah, that's been the review. Thanks for watching this video, and bye.